On that October day, the Esperance Bay sailed from Australia for Indonesia. But the real story behind this journey is the story of ships that didn't sail. Let's start at the beginning. Here in Australia, we know the Indonesians well. For years, they've lived in our country as friends and fellow townsmen. The women learnt the names of our vegetables. And mothers found that children were much the same in any language. There were the Indonesian soldiers and seamen. Our boys knew them as good fighters against the common enemy, Japan. At our Victory Loan rallies in Martin Place, we applauded their musicians, lending their support in thousands of pounds, as well as music. We liked their old Indonesian folk song, even if we didn't understand the words. But they did. Yet here in Australia, it wasn't just the river and rice fields, the villages of their homeland they thought about, but something they didn't have before the war, something they fought for with the Allies: independence. The voice of Indonesia calling.
Kami mengulangi lagi, Republik Indonesia telah berdiri dan kedaulatan ada di tangan rakyat. The Republic of Indonesia has been proclaimed. These are the salient points in the Republic's democratic constitution: freedom of organization, freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, and freedom of the press.
Maka di sini kita semua bangsa Indonesia mengaku dengan
Here, in the streets of Sydney, Indonesians repeated an oath which was being taken by their countrymen all over the world, an oath of loyalty to the new republic.
Mengaku dengan kebenaran membela Republik Indonesia untuk mencari kemerdekaan kita bangsa Indonesia sampai selama-lamanya, tidak mundur biarpun di dalam gelombang atau tindisan.
We shall not waver under Dutch oppression. We are ready to sacrifice our lives for freedom. With a pure heart, we pledge our word.
Dalam nama Allah, saya mengaku dengan kebenaran.
That night, they celebrated independence with the dance of the knight and the princess. For even in exile, they'd not forgotten their ancient culture. This dance, they told us, was over 1,500 years old, before Portuguese and Dutchmen came to Java. The wives and young citizens of the new republic were there too. Everyone joined in these dances. Yes, that night we celebrated. But in the morning, 72 million people took an oath to defend freedom with their lives. That wasn't just words. Look, those 72 million Indonesians live in some of the richest islands of the world. But for 3.5 centuries, Dutch colonial rulers have taken all the profits. Tin mines, the quinine monopoly, oil fields and rubber plantations. It added up to about 32 million pounds, or $100 million a year. That's quite a bit, eh? Now the war's over, they'll want to go back to making profits, and for that, they'll need ships. The ships are here in Australian harbours, in Brisbane, Melbourne and Sydney. Ships to reconquer their treasure islands, to get back their oil and rubber, their quinine and tin mines. Ships to break the back of the young republic. Ships to carry soldiers. Ships to carry guns. No, said the Indonesian seamen. We won't man your ships. We won't carry arms to be used against our own people. Here's our answer. Direct action. They left the ships. They walked off the wharves. They quit the offices. Soldiers refused service. It takes courage to strike against your rulers in a strange country, but they did that. And the Japs didn't tell them what to do. 350 years of Dutchmen taught them. They got together with Australian wharfies right here on the docks while the big ships waited. They spoke in a language workers in every country understand, of bad conditions, low wages, and what those 350 years of Dutch colonial rule had meant to Indonesia. The news spread, and waterside workers came from other wharves to listen. Finally, it turned into an impromptu meeting. That's when Australians had their say. Indonesian seamen weren't allowed to form a union till they came to Australia. We helped them get organised, and now we can't let them down. We can't scab on fellow workers. What about the Atlantic Charter? We're committed through the World Trade Union Congress to support freedom for all nations. Why not Indonesia? Their spokesman asked for just that, our support for Indonesia's struggle for freedom and self-determination. Well, it's up to us. Declare Dutch ships for Indonesia black. When the wharfies sat down, it meant action. Something happened on the waterfront which made all the difference in the life of a young republic. The Dutch companies, who had once had a great fleet to carry wealth from Indonesia, now had to beg for every ship to take them back. Suddenly, we heard that these were mercy ships loaded with food and medical supplies. Dutch authorities said they knew nothing of Tommy guns and ammunition alleged to be found by waterside workers. But they could hardly deny the statements of Mr. Chifley, Australia's Prime Minister.
The war's over. Go back home.
Australian support of free Indonesia.
You fought for your freedom. Let the Indonesians have theirs.
Arms and now soldiers. 1,600 armed Dutch soldiers bound for Java, lining the decks of the Stirling Castle. Australian diggers went out to meet them, and one Dutchman who spoke for the workers of Holland, supporting Indonesian freedom.
Indonesia.
Don't fight for Dutch imperialism.
Australian support of free Indonesia. Australian support of free Indonesia. The Lord
The Dutch didn't want to hear the truth. Indonesia calling. Through a static of gunfire, they heard the voice of their homeland, asking them to keep up the fight, to hold up all Dutch ships carrying arms to be used against the new republic.
Indonesia, bekerjalah bersama-sama dengan pergerakan kaum buruh di Australia.
Now the fight was really on. Wharfies chalked up their answer and walked off ship after ship. In Brisbane, Melbourne, Adelaide, Sydney, in all the ports of Australia. They said to the Dutch, loading ships is our livelihood. We'll load ships for Indonesia anytime if we get a guarantee that the cargo isn't arms or supplies that could be used against the Indonesian people.